Howdy doody buckaroonies. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take this pile of sadness
Da da da, hey, oh,
and turn it into this in only a few minutes. So today we're here to talk about vocal chops. Vocal chops are definitely something that is hard to get right. It's hard to find good vocals to chop up. It's really tedious to sit there and chop them. And it's also just kind of annoying and difficult sometimes to get the processing right to make them sound like you want them to sound and stand out in your mix, especially if it's something that's fairly dense. In this video, I wanted to share with you guys my personal kind of formula for vocal chops. This is what I use not only in my own music, but also when I'm doing sample packs for companies that require vocal chops in them. This is not only a process that's really easy, but something that I find is very time efficient and gives good results like 95% of the time. With that in mind, this should teach you just about everything you need to know to get started making better vocal chops and give you some processing tips to make them sound good. The only thing that differs in my approach to these is the processing chain. Now, obviously, it's not possible for me to share with you every single way to process vocal chops, so I want to give you the core idea and show you kind of a modern future bass type pop vocal chop sound. But feel free to experiment with this and change the processing in any way you see fit and whatever fits your track best. First things first, you're gonna need some vocals to get started with. I have linked 2 free sample packs down in the description below. I use these all the time myself. They are all over my music, usually in combination with my own voice, where I'll just kind of sing some random stuff if needed. For sample packs, I will just sing random stuff into the mic, and I'm a terrible singer, but by the end of this process, it will sound really good and it doesn't really matter. So if you wanna record yourself singing, feel free to do that, and then you have some unique stuff to use. To kick this whole process off, I'll go through and just select some random vocals here. Let's grab.
do what you wanna, do you feel, don't go change him far away.
And I'm gonna drag these all into one track, and the first thing you need to do is just trim out any silence. I see right here there's a little bit, so we'll just cut that out. And I think outside of that, we should be good to go. So we'll just move these close together, and this is gonna be important for this next step. So we're gonna join all of these together in DAWg. I'm just gonna use Ctrl-J, and we've created a single clip. Keep in mind, I'm not really paying attention to the key of the vocals because that's just gonna become irrelevant in the next few steps. So just use whatever vocals you're feeling, and even if you're singing and you're a terrible singer and it's like way out of key, it really doesn't matter. We're mostly just after different sounds, vowels, and phrases that we're gonna use. Now, to get the ball rolling, I'm gonna add a new track and add a drum rack, or whatever is the equivalent in your DAW. Then I'm gonna drag this onto here and select the auto slice option. Now, most DAWs have a way to auto slice based on a grid value, but if your DAW does not feature this, you can just manually slice this. Now, more often than not, I find that slicing them at half notes works best. That way they're not too short, but you might need to experiment a little. So I'm just gonna select half notes and hit OK. Now that we've got this sliced, I can play these back. And they don't really sound like much of anything, at least not yet. Now, the next key step here is going to be adding some kind of auto-tuning plugin. In my case, I'm going to be using the Reason Rack, and I'm going to be using the Neptune effect. Now, some people really don't like the sound of Neptune, and I actually really do. I really like it, especially for heavily processed vocals, because it has just a specific sound to it. If you don't have any kind of tuning plugin though, there is a free one from Melda Productions you can grab, and that works just as well. Now that we've got our tuning thing set up here, we're gonna set the key of our song. So my song is in D major, and I'm just going to up the correction speed and maybe a little bit of preserve expression. Now, if we play these back, it's gonna line them up into the key and things should sound a bit better. The only thing I need to do is switch this MIDI to voice synth and get rid of the voice synth. That way it's just going to tune these vocals and we're not going to affect them and make them sound weird. So right now they sound like this. Still not super great, but as you can hear, we're getting a bit closer. The real trick now is, since we've got our tuning set up, we can go in and adjust each of these slices individually. So let's move this a bit out of the way. Now what I'm gonna do is play this slice back. And then maybe trim it up. Let's say we just want this little bit. Now we can tune this to find a better point, because right now it's a little like pitchy and weird, but if we start tuning it around, now we've got a more solid sound, and then we'll repeat this for the following chops. Cool, I've got all these tuned up now, and they sound like this. So now we actually have some pretty convincing vocal chops. As an added tip, one thing I recommend you experiment with is the formant control. Now we can shift this up or down, and what the formant does is it's kind of like changing the shape of your throat, and another way to think of this is making things sound more like a female voice or like a male voice, like brighter or deeper. So we'll maybe shift this down just a bit. And that gives us that cool kind of like heavily sampled and processed feel without much effort at all. One final thing to do before you get any further is if you want to clean up that popping at the start of every sample, just go into your sampler and adjust the attack and release here. So let's just up the attack to like 5 milliseconds, something pretty short. And I'm just going to copy that to all the layers, then maybe adjust the release slightly and copy that to all my layers. Now, if I play back through these, you'll hear that there isn't any click or pop at the start. That way we have that nice smooth transition between every chop. Now that we have the tuning plugin set up, let's move through the post-processing chain on the completed example. So first up, we're gonna add some EQ. Right now the vocals sound like this, which is fine, but you can hear there's just some kind of muddy stuff and some low end that we're really not gonna need, especially considering we've got these big full chord stacks. So let's bring in this EQ. As you can see, I've cut out almost all of the low end up to around 400 Hertz. I've added a boost at about 600 Hertz just for a bit of that mid information to make it just a bit more full and give it some weight without adding that warmth, because we don't really need that in this case. Then a gentle high shelf about 6 dB starting at about 8K. So this is going to thin them out and remove that muddy stuff. It's going to add a bit more body to make them jump out of the speakers a bit, and that nice crispy top end. So with that EQ, the vocal chops now sound like this. So you can hear they're a lot more clear and they kind of jump out at you a bit more. Next up, we're going to add a compressor. I'm using PSP Oldtimer here. This is just one of my favorite compressors. It has a really nice spongy character, but I've got this on 4:1. The time is all the way down, so very fast attack and very fast release. And I'm compressing these really hard. You can see in some cases I'm going right up to -24. So aim for a 4:1 ratio, a fast attack, a fast release, and probably about -12 on the meter, or about -10, somewhere around there, and then just compensate with the output gain as needed. This is making sure that all the vocal chops are more or less the same level. We want to remove as much dynamic range as we can without getting too squashed. We just want to level all these vocals out so they sound the same, and that way each one of these chops is going to cut through the mix. Now that we have the core sound out of the way, we need to give them that big, larger-than-life feel. So I've got a free reverb here, Tal Reverb 4, I highly recommend. Size is up to about 70%, so probably around 5 or 6 second decay time. Low cut and high cut to taste, I cut at about 130 and at about 6K, and maybe about 50% wet. And this is a big, huge reverb, and you'll hear just this alone really takes these vocals up a notch to sound really polished. If you want to experiment a bit, one thing you can try is moving the compressor after the reverb, and that way you're squishing that reverb tail and bringing it up. But in the case of this track, it felt a little too big, but that is a trick to keep in mind. Next up, I usually like to add a bit of heat to the vocal with a saturator. I've got PSP Mix Saturator 2 on tape mode. Pretty heavy saturation, as you see, about 93%, and I've mixed this in parallel at about 20%. Now, this isn't totally a necessary step. I just find it's a nice way to add a bit more bite to the vocal and just make them jump out of the speakers a little bit more. So blend this into taste without any of it. And if we blend it in all the way, that's really too much. So, just blend that into taste. I recommend doing this after the reverb as well. It just makes the reverb tail a bit more gritty and, fills things out a bit more. This final EQ here is not actually part of my usual chain of events. This is just the mixing EQ. So really all you need is to save this auto-tuning, this first EQ to just carve the vocal, the compressor, a reverb and or delay, and a saturator. So you could just save all of this really as one giant processing chain, group it together, and there you go. You've now got an instant future-based vocal rack that you can call up whenever you need it. With that in mind, let's take that same processing chain and apply it to these vocals we made at the beginning, which don't really sound that fascinating, but we can go ahead and turn on that processing chain, and we should be in a much better space in a matter of like seconds. And there you have it, my general formula for vocal chops for just about any genre. You can obviously experiment with the processing chain with things like bit crushers, filters, delays, whatever you want, just to get a bit more creative and make them fit your track and the vibe. But this acts, I find, as a really good base canvas to start from. And so I think that concludes our time here today. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.